It might be called the daughter of an American revolution, a child of the civil rights revolution of the 60s. The feminist revolution quickly grew into the largest social movement of the late 20th century, a movement that challenged the fundamental relationship between men and women.
It's not a fetus, it's a human life.
But if feminism became the greatest social revolution of the 20th century, it also spawned one of the most divisive debates in America's history, the fiery cauldron of abortion, the fight for women's rights, and the unending conflict over abortion on this edition of the 20th Century. I'm Mike Wallace. The struggle for women's rights is not new. Women fought for years to gain the right to vote, a triumph that became law finally in 1920. But the Depression stifled any immediate further movement toward equality. 26 states actually prohibited the employment of married women. "Don't steal a job from a man" was a popular slogan of the time. World War II changed all that. Women poured into the workplace in unprecedented numbers.
Under the supervision of experts, women install the wiring which women have assembled, while the boys at the front sing a new version. The girl I left behind has the job I left behind, and she can have it too, till Johnny comes marching home again.
But despite a poll showing that 80% of working women wanted to keep their jobs after the war, 4 million women were unceremoniously fired when the war ended.
Isn't it wonderful how this washer does all these heavy things? Imagine, pillows.
Post-war women found themselves in an attractive new world of domesticity, full of labor-saving devices. But mere appliances couldn't alleviate women's growing frustration.
The truth is that there were many, many out there who were thinking deep in their hearts, why am I so miserable?
Betty Friedan sowed the seeds of the female revolution with her 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique.
I don't think anybody can overestimate the enormous, explosive effect that Betty had on the culture just by writing this book that spoke the thing's name.
This revolution did not begin to happen in the early 60s because I or any other witch of Salem seduced otherwise happy housewives that would be having orgasms waxing the kitchen floor and throwing powders into the dishwashing machine if we hadn't come along. It happened from historical necessity.
In 1966, a group of women led by Betty Friedan founded NOW, the National Organization for Women.
We are an enormous movement.
Women began by protesting the symbols of their inequality, institutions like men-only bars.
Would you like a sign up there that said blacks only or whites only?
It's the same principle, sir. Women are persons, women are people.
And we want to be able to come and go through it, and we don't want to be intimidated by signs that say men's buffet.
I have no intentions of taking the sign down or changing the sign. If you can get a court order to take it down, fine.
You have no intention of changing your policy of segregated facilities. Is that correct, sir?
If you women are that hard up for a glass of beer, I'll be glad to serve you at the bar.
Roll out the banner, we'll have a barrel of fun.
They protested inequality on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
We can't bear any more bull.
They're part of a new feminist movement for women's rights, and they say that this is where they're at. A lot of women working, nearly 30 million of them, but very few in executive positions.
These women want equal job opportunities, equal pay with men for the same jobs, child care centers, and more or less unrestricted abortions.
3 out of 4 of the women who work are doing secretary, file clerk, hospital aides, that kind of thing. Only a token 1, 2, or 3% are administrators, executives, decision makers. Only 1 woman out of 100 in the Senate for 51% of the population.
Out of the house and into the world.
This group this day was under surveillance by the FBI. It wasn't only the politics of these women's groups which would bother the G-men, it was their physical appearance. One official report commented on the unattractiveness of the women and cited the extreme fuzziness of their hair.
But it wasn't just the FBI that took note of women's appearances. feminists challenged the whole idea of beauty pageants as being demeaning to women. In 1968, they shocked a lot of Americans by protesting at that icon of beauty pageants, the Miss America contest in Atlantic City.
These demonstrators are members of women's liberation. They say that not just women, but men too must be liberated from narrow concepts of what women traditionally are supposed to be. This march is in protest against what these young women think is one symbol of their oppression, Miss America, the reduction of woman to a kind of domesticated sex object.
It was an image women tried to erase not only in society at large, but also among themselves. They set up what they called consciousness-raising groups.
Consciousness raising was such an extraordinary organizing tool. First of all, it was free. All you had to do is get about 7 women together in a room and say, okay, when you want to have a baby, do you want a boy or a girl? And then from there, you would start talking about, do you value boys higher than you value girls or whatever?
Women began pushing in earnest for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. First introduced in 1923, the amendment read, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex."
The Equal Rights Amendment means, and this is what our message should be, that women can live and work and learn as they choose. These rights are long overdue.
The amendment was passed in the House and the Senate by 1972 and was quickly ratified by 30 of the necessary 38 states. But opponents launched a forceful counterattack led by Phyllis Schlafly, then an obscure Illinois housewife. Schlafly quickly came to personify female opposition to the women's rights movement.
Several years ago, a study was made about the Equal Rights Amendment at the Drake Law School in Iowa, and they concluded that if the Equal Rights Amendment were ever ratified, it would encourage the legislatures and the states and the courts to adopt a wildly permissive role which would have the effect of driving the homemaker out of the home.
Schlafly wasn't alone. Maribel Morgan's book, The Total Woman, found its way onto the bestseller list, arguing that women could be happy only in the traditional role of housewife.
It is only when a woman surrenders her life to her husband, reveres and worships him, and is willing to serve him, that she becomes really beautiful to him. She becomes a priceless jewel. The glory of femininity is queen. Doesn't this go against, just completely against the grain of modern American life today and what's happening to American women?
Well, it may, but that doesn't bother me any. You're talking about reality. I couldn't care less what modern America says. This worked for me. I tried to browbeat my husband into doing things my way. I tried to run the family. I was a grouch. No one was happy. I changed. I'm having a wonderful time. My family loves me.
From the beginning, men were upset by the women's movement, not only by its political overtones and sexual undertones, but also because this movement would disturb family life itself.
We're not talking about the partnership, because if marriage is
No,
it's a partnership.
I mean if somebody else takes care of that child.
Oh,
This is what it is.
child care costs you, for one child, at least $40 or $50
You get
a week.
supplemental. Child care cannot do what a parent can do. I don't care what you say.
All the forces of reaction in this society are suddenly mobilizing against it. Against us, against women. I mean, who knew that we could be that much danger to anybody? But you know, they really have.
And they were successful in stopping ERA. Despite the ERA defeat, though, women did make gains through the courts in their fight for equality.
The women's movement could count some gains in economic terms and in the dialogue between sexes. Indeed, by the end of the decade, it was a movement so powerful that the women who led it in the beginning found that in living rooms, bedrooms, and workrooms, ordinary people were leading themselves.
The defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment convinced many women they needed to get much more involved in politics to replace the male legislators who had voted down ERA.
It's absolutely unimportant which party. Let's just get women into the government offices where they may be able to change some of the tides that need changing very badly.
But some of those tides were already beginning to change.
Tradition at Princeton is not being stripped away, but gently peeled away. Co-education starting in a small way, 171 women undergraduates living on a campus of 3,200 men, a ratio of about 19 to 1.
These days at the service academies, West Point, Annapolis, and the rest, they're wondering how will it work out next year? With women breaking into the long gray line and into the Corps of Midshipmen for the first time, how will the schools have to adjust for them? It's a tough grind, academically and physically.
Outside school, men now could no longer assume their co-workers would be other men. Women became carpenters, engineers, electricians, bus drivers, firefighters, police officers, and truck drivers in greater numbers than ever before.
This tall, 29-year-old, 150-pound woman has a job that has made many a grown man shudder. Even getting to work is dangerous. She is one of dozens of women who have invaded offshore oil rigs in the last year to take jobs traditionally open only to males. Because of federal guidelines prohibiting sex discrimination in hiring by companies which hold federal offshore oil leases, women are being recruited. Consequently, Boots Lofton, as she's called out here, was able to land her job as a roustabout, one of the meanest offshore jobs of all.
And I do everything a roustabout's supposed to do. And because I don't want a man picking up a 100-pound sack for me, because I feel like if he picks that 100-pound sack up for me, well, he's taking strength out of his body for his children, and we're both out there trying to make a living. And if I can't pick that 100-pound sack up, I ain't got no business being there.
Women began to realize, though, that getting a job was not the end of the battle for equality.
When it comes to money, the statistics show the average full-time working woman takes home only 62% of what her male counterpart earns. Both sexes were in agreement on one thing. 2 out of 3 people said they'd rather work for a man than for a woman. So what started in the streets as a social issue ended in the workplace as an economic issue.
The issue is not equal pay for equal work. The courts have already said that's the law. The issue is whether women are channeled into certain jobs, clerical, some factory, and then paid less than men doing other jobs which demand the same level of skill or experience. In Denver, nurses, women, sued because they made less than tree trimmers, men. They lost. In Oregon, prison matron Alberta Gunther sued because she and her colleagues earned less than prison guards. The court said that was intentional discrimination, and the women won.
Basically, what we're talking about is the right to get the job, any job that exists, the right to go into training programs, and the right to be promoted on merit, all the way up the ladder, right up to the president's corner office.
Women began to test those waters, too. Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman elected to the House of Representatives, was among the nominees for president at the Democratic Convention in 1972.
We understand that just as Mrs. Chisholm is a person who happens to be black and running for the presidency, that she also happens to be a woman who's running for the presidency. And so therefore, Mrs. Chisholm finds herself in the very unique position of being a part of two segments in America who've never really had an important role to play in the decision-making processes with respect to national government every 4 years.
More and more women are running for more and more offices, and most everywhere they do run, they are not only running against men, they are running against tradition, against an established pattern.
Running against tradition would prove to be a problem for women themselves. It was hard to get women to agree on a common set of goals. In an effort to get women to unify, 15,000 women from every state in the Union attended the first, last, and only National Women's Conference in 1977.
A torch held high for feminists who have come to Houston. It is supposed to be a symbol of progress toward equality and of the unity they hope to create here. 3 First Ladies of the United States, Betty Ford, Lady Bird Johnson, and Rosalind Carter, stood on stage in agreement with that purpose. The convention cost is $5 million, taxpayer money. Texas Congresswoman Barbara Jordan warned the women to waste neither the money nor the opportunity of the moment.
The cause of equal and human rights will reap what is sown. November 18 through November 21, 1977. What will you reap? What will you sow?
Women did begin to harvest some of the fruits of their protest. Now, female college graduates could begin to expect careers as doctors, stockbrokers, bankers, lawyers, judges.
Good evening. President Reagan today named a woman to the Supreme Court, and another barrier fell.
I will send to the Senate the nomination of Judge Sandra Day O'Connor of Arizona Court of Appeals for confirmation as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
As the number of firsts for women began to mushroom, the river of women entering the job market became a flood.
Like other middle-class families, the Hackers are feeling the bite of inflation. And for Judy Hacker, it's meant going to work full-time for the first time in her married life.
I am working for the money. I don't particularly enjoy going out every day. But if I stay home, I spend money. If I go out, I'm with people and I'm making money. It's just as simple as that.
Then no profits.
With a record number of women flooding the workplace, what was once the unusual has become the norm.
The only way people can make ends meet is if the women, as well as the men, go into the workplace and bring home the bacon.
Sometimes that meant going into business for themselves. By the end of the decade, women owned 5 million businesses with revenues of $83 billion a year.
For sisters Gretchen Minyard and Liz Minyard Williams, co-owners and co-chairs of Minyard Supermarkets, the dream of getting started was the easy part. Their father, aunt, and uncles opened Minyard's grocery store in Dallas 61 years ago. Today, the thriving company boasts 77 stores, 6,100 employees. It's a $750 million business.
Women business owners have been, if you will, the unseen and unsung heroes of our economy.
Unsung or not, growing economic power brought increased political clout.
It's a first, it's official, it's a woman. Walter Mondale today picked New York Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro, his #1 choice for #2 on the ticket.
Vice President, it has such a nice ring to it.
But Ferraro and her running mate Walter Mondale were swamped in the Reagan landslide of 1984. Ferraro's run for the vice presidency seemed at once a climax and an end to the string of firsts women had been achieving in the early years of the women's revolution. The revolution was maturing. The problems were becoming more complicated.
He commented on what I was wearing in terms of whether it made me more or less sexually attractive.
In 1991, Anita Hill accused Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexually harassing her when he was her boss at the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission.
On other occasions, he referred to the size of his own penis as being larger than normal, and he also spoke on some occasions of the pleasures he had given to women with oral sex.
That kind of language has been used about black men as long as I've been on the face of this earth. And these are charges that play into racist, bigoted stereotypes.
In the end, Thomas was confirmed, but the whole process set off a firestorm.
With so much talk now about sexual harassment in the workplace, employers nationwide are scrambling for strategies to try to deal with the problem.
We're talking about it just in every household and out on the street. Everyone's going to talk about it. It's the big news right now.
A lot of management employees, male managers especially, have decided the only safe way to act is to keep at arm's length from all female employees. No touching, no hugging, no kissing, no pats on the back. Not get involved in discussing personal matters with employees.
The issues for working women were changing.
Few things show more clearly how the workplace has changed and how society has failed to keep pace than America's shortage of daycare. Despite enormous demand, 71% in a recent poll called for government to spend billions on daycare, government has yet to meet women's needs.
They need a kind of Marshall Plan for the family, and they're looking to government to help provide that. They recognize and feel that they have been abandoned by government.
There's an incredible double talk that goes in our society.
We profess profound love for babies, and we say children are so important, and the role of motherhood, that is so prestigious. We really honor that role, and yet for all purposes that really have any meaning, we don't.
In our economy, housework doesn't count, laundry doesn't count, ironing doesn't count, cooking doesn't count, being a chauffeur doesn't count. Well, we counted, all right. As the day wore on, 15 pickups and drop-offs. It's work, real work. And after dark, 13 hours after they got started, it is still going strong.
They're not the sexy hot-button issues that get covered in the media.
If I gave the kids truth serum, would they think you would spend enough time with them?
I don't think they would think so.
They'd like more time from
I think they would like more time.
How do you feel? Have you spent enough time?
I feel that no, you never spend enough time with your children. You know, what mother wouldn't want to spend all her time with her children? But I gave them the best I had, and everything that I could give them, I gave them. And I think that if you gave them truth serum, they would also tell you that they think I'm a good mom and that I've been there for them in the pinches.
Nevertheless, that conflict between being a good mom and having a successful career, having it all, is only one of the problems the women's revolution has emphasized.
Feminism today, like God, is everywhere. It's in the expectations that people have for their daughters. It's in the lack of surprise you feel when you walk out to the corner and the cop is a woman. It's in the sense that coaches have that the pitcher may just as well be a girl as a boy. All these things that we never would have dreamed of in 1970 or 1971 have just come to pass.
Abortion. Mention the word and you're sure to get an argument. It has become one of the most complicated and divisive social issues of the century. The history of abortion is as old as civilization. 6,000 years ago, the Chinese had a prescription to induce abortion. 4,000 years later, Hippocrates said he would not help a woman provoke an abortion. Until very recently, abortions in the United States were illegal except under very limited circumstances. But that didn't stop women from getting abortions.
I thought, at that time they used general anesthetic. So when I went under, I thought, I could die here. And who would know? Who would even know that I had sought out this Cuban doctor in Havana? You know?
The illegal termination of pregnancy has reached epidemic proportions in this country. The laws which govern abortion are broken an estimated 1 million times a year. 3,000 times a day. For various medical, social, and economic reasons, the laws do not recognize as valid. The facts are astonishing. 1 out of every 5 pregnancies in the United States is terminated. 350,000 women a year suffer post-operative complications. 5,000 of these women die. These illegal operations are performed by physicians, nurses, orderlies, beauticians, midwives, others from all walks of life, and by the women themselves. In 1962, the world was made aware of the restrictive abortion laws in this country when Mrs. Sherry Finkbein, Arizona housewife and mother of 4, having taken thalidomide pills during pregnancy, feared her baby would be born malformed. Unable to have a therapeutic abortion in Phoenix, Mrs. Finkbein went abroad where her pregnancy was terminated.
The reason most women go ahead and do this, even and submit to criminal abortion, is to the intensity with which they really can't face having another child.
The new feminist movement quickly focused attention on the abortion problem. Women had the right, feminists said, to decide what to do about their own pregnancies.
In New York. We are here to make known the unity of women behind the demand that abortion be a woman's right to choose.
We do not seek to impose abortion on any woman who doesn't seek one. But by the same token, the women or men who oppose abortion have no right to deprive anybody of a fundamental right.
Gradually, pressure brought change. California liberalized its abortion law in 1967, New York 3 years later. The debate intensified.
If a human life is a mistake and can be ended at one end of the spectrum, why, if it's a mistake, can it be ended at the other end of the spectrum? Go back a few years and end it here. to end. Does it make any difference when it's a mistake? If it's a mistake?
Heated debate on abortion is taking place throughout the country. You can hear it in churches and women's clubs, on college campuses and state legislatures. One lawmaker brought a fetus in a bottle to the New York debate.
Here's your victim, Mr. Blumenthal. Right here. In the jar. Unobserved by the majority of members of this House because many of them haven't got the courage to come over here and look at it.
That decision is personal, not only for the people of the state of New York, but for each and every member of this legislature. And I'm not going to have 149 members of this legislature tell my wife what her decision should be in case she desires an abortion.
There should be no man, no priest or politician, no doctor or any hospital administrator, no government official or husband who should have the right to force any woman to have a child against her will.
The Supreme Court has been asked to rule specifically whether laws restricting abortion in Texas and Georgia are a violation of the right to privacy and a denial of individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution. If the Supreme Court decides the Texas and Georgia laws on abortion are unconstitutional, that would open the way to legalized abortion throughout the country. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court handed down its historic decision in the Texas case, a case that pitted Norma McCorvey, known as Jane Roe to protect her identity, against Henry Wade, the Dallas District Attorney.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government.
After that comparatively safe 3-month period, abortions may be regulated, but not prohibited by state law and for the benefit of the mother's health alone. Abortion is somewhat more dangerous at this stage, and states may insist, for example, that they be performed in regulated hospitals. Only in the final stages of pregnancy may states intervene and say no to abortion.
I think that to raise the dignity of woman and give her freedom of choice in this area is an extraordinary event.
I think that the judgment of the court will do a great deal to tear down the respect previously accorded human life in our culture.
Roe versus Wade, as the case was known, became a rallying cry for both sides in the supercharged atmosphere of the abortion debate. The Supreme Court decision caused an earthquake. Almost from the start, opponents, led largely by religious groups, took to the streets to try to get Roe versus Wade overturned.
When a nation that's founded on the freedom and worth of every individual decides that the weakest among us have no value and can be destroyed, then who is left? Who is safe?
But if the ruling energized the anti-abortion movement, it also had a profound effect on those women who wanted an abortion.
When you hear your name being called, you'll follow the nurse into the procedure room.
A few minutes following this counseling session, the patient will abort a fetus. She is one of the estimated 900,000 women in the United States who will this year exercise the legal right to abortion granted by the Supreme Court. At this New York clinic alone, 8,500 abortions will be performed this year.
Initially, the court's decision had its biggest impact on poor women because the government would now pay for their abortions.
I believe with the Supreme Court decision, this will now be considered, as it has been by Blue Cross, to be a normal medical need, and the payment will come even if you're poor and on welfare.
The long fight to roll back the Supreme Court decision began when Congress got involved with federal funding of abortions.
We speak as a pro-life group for the millions of Americans who are appalled at the fact that 1 out of every 3 pregnancies ends in an abortion. There are 1.5 million abortions every year tolerated in America.
Yes, abortion, no. Life, yes, abortion, no.
Hyde had no special involvement with the abortion issue until 1976, when he proposed the Hyde Amendment as a tag-on to a Labor HEW appropriations bill, and it passed. It cuts off all federal Medicaid payments for abortion. And while it hasn't stopped most poor people from getting abortions, it has made it harder.
Red roses, the flower of beauty, life, love. Now they've become a political symbol, adopted by the anti-abortion movement to signify the unborn. On this and every January 22nd since the Supreme Court decision, 5,000 red roses are shipped into Washington at dawn and delivered by the dozen to every senator and congressman by midday. The opponents of abortion have learned how to lobby. They know the power of symbols, of roses and language. They call themselves the pro-life movement. Their aim, they say, is a human life amendment to the Constitution that would outlaw abortion. To understand the politics of abortion, you have to go to your local high school or church basement.
We support the 1973 U.S. Supreme Court decisions, which guarantee reproductive freedom to women.
For 197 years, this country got along fine without abortion being legal. And I, for one, will go to the ends of the earth to stop reproductive freedom. I will give my very life just to save one of those little babies.
But pro-abortion forces were not silent. Women at the 1977 National Women's Conference adopted a pro-abortion plank. It was one of the few times the two sides had a civilized debate on the issue in the same forum.
It is the antithesis of the feminist women's movement to oppress the less powerful. It therefore has to be absolutely ridiculous for people who call themselves feminists to suggest that they kill their unborn children to solve their social problems.
The resolution on reproductive freedom
they're going to do
adopted.
In recent months, the politics of abortion has grown ugly. Passionate feelings stir extremist acts. Fierce rhetoric yields to firebombs. At least 5 abortion clinics have been forced to close or move because of violence.
Someone tries to come through like that, you know, give, but don't go pushing back.
Right-to-lifers who are seeking to reverse the Supreme Court's 1973 decision and outlaw abortion say they neither espouse violence nor sanction extremism. The Catholic Church has condemned such acts.
Jeannie is now an abortion clinic member of the abortion clinic personnel, okay? And she's doing something which has happened in the past.
What's your hang-up here anyway? Protecting human life. Now, you have no right to be here. Will you let me through? Yes, we do. The right of common law. We're protecting human life. Protecting the I don't know who you unborn think you're children. protecting, but this is my place of business, and I have a right to be back there. Now, get out of my way.
These opponents of abortion are in a strategy session that borrows from the pages of civil rights demonstrations and anti-war protests of the 60s. They're turning to nonviolent, direct action.
All right, can we all kind of...
Rockville, Maryland, 2 days before Christmas. A well-organized anti-abortion group gathers for action. Their target, a clinic 2 miles away which provides abortions for women in the first 3 months of pregnancy. Their objective, to enter and occupy the clinic before scheduled abortions begin. Block the procedure rooms. Keep the pregnant women from entering.
Back off. Back off. Back off. Hold still. Back off. Hold still.
Okay, no pushing, no pushing. Nobody push.
Get out.
All right, nobody push.
Everybody
Okay.
sit down.
Nobody push. Just sit down, everybody. Sit down. That's it.
Okay, stay seated.
Just stay seated.
Stay seated. Move it. Stay seated. Move it. Let the guy This do what is he private wants. property. Move out.
You
hear me?
All right, if he pushes you,
Move out.
just stand there, okay? Don't let them push you, though. Just stand there. Go ahead, sit down. Sit down. Just sit down. Sit down right there. Sit down, Bruce. Just sit down. That's it. Just,
Sit
Bruce,
down,
just sit
sit
down.
down.
Just sit down. Don't let them hit you or punch you. Just sit down.
The man in the glasses is a doctor at the clinic.
Just stay seated.
Moments after the demonstration began, a young woman in a dark green ski jacket arrives for an abortion.
Why? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of her seeing? This simply has a phone number that if she wants to hear some other facts, if she wants some other facts.
No, I don't want to hear some other
If she'd want to hear
Oh, yes, I'm telling you.
Excuse me. Come on. Come on, dear.
What are you afraid of, doctor? Or sir, that you don't want her to hear? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
Kill your baby.
You all right, Dean?
Go back to Pat. Okay. Just stand. Come on. All right.
You're kind of smart, aren't you?
Just stand right where you are, Liz.
You stay right there.
Come on. Okay. Just stay where you are.
You're trespassing now.
I wish you all.
What are you doing?
It is 20 minutes at least before the police come. They have been here before. In 1974, the first organized confrontation of this kind took place in this Rockville clinic.
It's not the place to change the law. It's got to be done.
We're not
courts.
trying to change the law here now. Right here now, we're just trying to save those 2 lives that are in there.
Well,
and those,
right now.
and
But you're
those
not
girls
welcome.
Who are,
You're not welcome.
5 people are arrested, booked for trespassing, released on bail. It's not an isolated incident in the politics of abortion. Supporters of a woman's freedom to choose, pro-abortionists, have been complacent since the Supreme Court legalized abortions, and they know it. Now they're organizing to fight back. This is the annual meeting of the National Abortion Rights Action League, a pep rally of a sort, complete with buttons and bumper stickers. The message is loud and clear. The decision of the Supreme Court is under attack and may well be reversed if abortion advocates fail to act.
We're tired of abortion. We're tired of murder.
Demonstrations against legal abortion were held across the country today, while supporters of abortion rights held round-the-clock vigils at clinics to protest bombings and other recent violence.
Babies have rights. That's right. Abortion is murder.
There were confrontations between the opposing groups outside a number of abortion clinics, including one in Hicksville, New York. Anti-abortion activists shouted at patients as they were being escorted into the clinic by members of the National Organization for Women.
Could we have order, please?
At a congressional hearing in Washington, these people are demonstrating in favor of legal abortions. They say they too are pro-life, but also pro-choice, a choice that has allowed the number of legal abortions to climb from 750,000 in 1973 to 1.5 million a year now.
Now, I happen to have believed and stated many times that I believe in an abortion, we are taking a human life.
Those opposed to abortion were elated with the election of an avowedly anti-abortion president, and they won their first important court test.
By a majority of 1, the Supreme Court today cut off federal payment for most abortions for poor women.
The court upheld the constitutionality of the Hyde Amendment, which forbids the use of federal Medicaid funds to pay for abortions, except in cases of rape or incest or to save the life of a woman.
The court was changing. First, President Reagan and then President Bush made it clear they preferred anti-abortion candidates.
In his first statement to the public on his first working day, President Bush sounded a lot like Ronald Reagan, not the moderate he's tried to be since the election. Speaking by telephone over loudspeakers, Mr. Bush gave anti-abortion demonstrators an emotional message of support.
I think the Supreme Court's decision in Roe versus Wade was wrong and should be overturned. I promise you that the President hears you now and stands with you in a cause that must be won.
Years of controlling Supreme Court appointments appeared to pay off as the court began to hand down decisions limiting abortion.
The U.S. Supreme Court made it easier for states to restrict a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. Now, the justices stopped short of outright rolling back and reversing the landmark abortion ruling of 1973. But today's ruling here sets the stage for more decisions and debate on one of the most divisive and deeply felt social issues of our times.
Specifically, the court upheld a Missouri law that, except in cases where it's necessary to save the mother's life, bans all abortions performed in public facilities and blocks public employees from performing or assisting in abortions.
Armed with new authority from the court, some states went into action almost immediately to try to tighten abortion restrictions even more.
Today's measure, which the governor has said he'll sign, tightens the law this way. It outlaws abortions after 24 weeks unless a woman faces serious permanent injury. It imposes a 24-hour waiting period after pre-abortion counseling, requires the husband be notified, and bans abortions for the purpose of selecting a baby's sex.
Pro-abortion activists were alarmed. The Supreme Court could use the Pennsylvania law as a way to overturn the anti-abortion decision.
An estimated 500,000 demonstrators for abortion rights flooded the nation's capital from across the country today. Their message was as much personal as it was political.
They came because they believe the U.S. Supreme Court, now dominated by Reagan-Bush appointees, is on the brink of overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade decision that allows most abortions.
The Supreme Court handed down its long-awaited abortion decision today. Abortion is still legal. The court did not overturn Roe v. Wade.
As an emotional crowd waited outside the Supreme Court, inside, the justices announced a surprise decision. By a vote of 5-4, the conservative-dominated court affirmed a basic right to abortion. It also gave states broad power to make it harder for women to get abortions, but it was a major setback for the anti-abortion movement.
This court has given us very little hope that anything can be done about the basic problem of abortion on demand throughout pregnancy.
The frustration of the anti-abortion forces seemed to be reflected in their protests. They became more violent, more personal. Often they were aimed at the doctors who performed abortions.
As he got out of his automobile, the doctor who operated an abortion clinic in Pensacola was shot to death.
In church this past Sunday, Michael Griffin offered a public prayer for Dr. David Gunn, that Gunn should stop performing abortions and do what the Bible says is right. Today, police and witnesses say Griffin used a different weapon.
The guy, you know, he just went up, chased the doctor there, and just shot him point blank.
Dr. Wickland found a baby carriage in her driveway and a banner saying, "No more dead babies." Since then, the Lambs of Christ have blocked her driveway with barrels of cement, and Wickland claims they broke into her house twice. But what really makes her angry is that they followed her daughter to school and passed out leaflets at the school saying, "Dr. Wickland is a baby killer."
The Lambs say, "We're just praying at the end of her driveway." Bullshit. They're not just praying at the end of my driveway.
A doctor and a volunteer were shot and killed this morning outside an abortion clinic in Pensacola, Florida. A militant abortion opponent was arrested and charged with murder.
Dr. John Bayard Britton always wore a bulletproof vest when he came to perform abortions at this Pensacola clinic. His killer shot him in the head.
A 12-gauge shotgun was used. Several rounds was fired.
40-year-old Paul Hill, a regular protester at the clinic, has been charged.
Now is the time to defend the unborn in the same way you defend slaves about to be murdered.
There appears to be no end in sight to the battle over abortion rights.
We are not deciding between legal abortion and no abortion. We have never been deciding about that. We have always been looking at whether abortion is going to be legal or whether it's going to be illegal. Because no matter what we decide, women are going to find a way to end pregnancies that they don't want to carry to term.
From the beginning of recorded history, societies have struggled with these issues, the role of women and the question of abortion. Until this century, in this country, few women could expect anything beyond the traditional role of wife, mother, keeper of the home. In much of the rest of the world, women are still relegated to the same second-class status they faced generations ago. Few revolutions have been as profound as the women's movement. Few debates have been as divisive as abortion. They are the dominant social issues of our time, examples of what honest debate can and cannot accomplish. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century.